Welcome to That Entrepreneur Life, a podcast about entrepreneurship that takes you from idea to launch and beyond. Each week, your hosts, Andrew Lees and Clint McPherson, discuss different business topics aimed at adding value to any entrepreneur's journey.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Entrepreneur Life. I'm Andrew Lees, and I'm joined with my co-host, Clint McPherson, as always. What's up, man?
Not much, brother. What's up, everybody? I'm excited to be here for another episode. And with that said, let's go ahead and kick this thing off by welcoming our special guest, Tom Libelt, to the show. How you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm good. How are you guys?
Really good. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, it's an honor to have you on the show, Tom, and we appreciate your time. But before we launch into our discussion, it's important for us to take a few moments and, can you explain to our listeners what you do and, what you're all about?
Well, I've been in business for a long, long time. I think I was asked this question the other day. I counted back to 9 years old. That was my first business type of job. And overall, done a lot of different things. I was in retail. I was in inside sales, outside sales. I've been in the music industry, SEO, marketing. Now we've niched down, so we really only market online courses, but it's been a long path, getting to this point. But it's always been business related. Like the only time I've taken jobs was to either get discounts on stuff that I could sell in my own stores. Because when I was younger, that was the thing to do. Like I worked at Tommy Hilfiger and I negotiated like a 75% discount. So I took all the best stuff when it was on sale and discounted, which was like $4 a piece, and sold them for like 40. And then later on, to just get better at sales. So if you know what the big corporations do is when they hire you for a sales job, they will give you from 3 to 2 weeks worth of training. Right. So my whole goal at that point was, well, what I want to do is go from one to the next. So I would get the training, hit my goals, and quit. And then go to the next company. Right. So the bosses hated me. But, it was my way of, they used me, I used them. That's how I felt.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you gamified the system.
Yeah. So my thinking was, if you can sell, you're always in business. Right. And it's proven true. With everything I've done since. So if anyone says, like these questions, like if you had to start from scratch or anything, I was like, I don't know, I would just sell something. Because if you can sell, you're fine. Like once the income comes in, you're able to figure out the back end. I mean, it might be bumpy, but you can figure it out. Money solves a lot of problems.
Sure.
Not all problems, but
not all, no. But in business, a lot. Most of the problems we find in business is due to being overworked, not being able to delegate, and not being able to think about the business, right? And all of those problems are solved with sales. Like if anyone has a problem with their business and they say, well, what should I fix? Fix your sales, and then everything else you can fix with that, So
yeah.
That was pretty much the path. Like it was a very weird path going through, but it's always been business related. And then, eventually we kind of ended up where we are now, which is this niche marketing company, just to market online courses.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's good to find something and, pick something to niche down to and really focus on, and I think that's to some degree, that's what we're all, as entrepreneurs, we're all trying to find, that one or two or maybe just a couple things that we're really, really good at and that we can focus on. And that's when I think, a lot of opportunity comes out of that kind of situation.
Well, here are a few things that I would like to mention because I've done this a couple times. And a few times it was bad decisions that became great and bad again. But there were a couple of things I noticed. Niching down is important for the most part, right? Like in my case, when we were running the marketing company, initially, we did it for everybody. Right? We did it for e-commerce stores. We did it for small business, big business, anyone. And then if you had someone come up and, ask me, why would I pick you over someone like Jay Abraham? And I was like, well, there's zero reasons at all. If you can afford him, because if it's, generic marketing, I would pick them too. But now, since we became a big fish in a small pond, which is just a little niche, if someone asks me that question, I'm like, Jay has no clue about online courses. Like, he hires me to do stuff like that. And it's a much easier sale in a way, right? Like, the market is smaller, but we found by being in a smaller market with hungry buyers, because people that create courses, they only create them to sell them, right? So it's hungry buyers. They want to sell their stuff. They would need help with that. We've been fully booked and been able to charge way more than our competition by doing the opposite of what you usually think. Like, oh, if I can get 1% of this, I'd be a billionaire. Well, maybe, but the competition's fierce. By going smaller, and our market is really small. Like, I calculated, and people actually that could potentially afford any of our services, even the lower ones, we have maybe 130,000 people in the world that could be our market, right? But it's still enough. And I've actually worked with people who had smaller markets, but charged even more, and we're doing fine too. Like, I had a chiropractor that was doing an online course teaching other chiropractors, and he was selling his stuff like $4,000 to $7,000. His market was 80,000, and he was doing really well too, right? So sometimes being at the right place, it's just much easier. Another thing about choosing the path, and like your strengths. Often the easy way out, because when you have these forks in the road, right? Sometimes like you'll have like the easier way, like, oh, I'm gonna go push my stuff on Amazon, on Facebook, on Twitter, on because it's an easy way. There's a market. It often becomes the best and worst thing that happens in your life, because you'll make a lot of money, you'll invest a lot, and one day it's completely over. All right. So that harder path of, I'm going to build my own product, my own platform, my own marketplace in a way, my own list, much more difficult, and it's going to suck for much longer, but eventually you're in charge, you're in control, right? And this happened to me before too. We had a moment after our SEO company was running for a couple of years where all the blog networks got destroyed by Google, right? Like, we used to pay to post blogs, like little blog posts on different networks, like maybe 50 or 100 per month for each client. And they would give backlinks to those websites, just for people that don't understand. And Google, seeing all of us doing that, the whole industry, they got memberships in the same blog networks because it wasn't hard. And they just found the IP addresses and destroyed everything, right? So we were out like tens of thousands of dollars. We had all these blog posts. And, for me, I had a team at that time, a team of writers, really good writers. And I wasn't sure what to do with them. And again, easy or hard, right? Like, which way you're going to choose? And I found this little easy path. I heard about this thing called Kindle. You've been doing blogs about different topics. Just start writing different stuff on the Kindle. And that business grew. Eventually, we had 5,000 books out, making a lot of money, also invested a lot of money. And one day the account got shut down. No reason given, no way to appeal. And that whole business, which, was running by itself, it just got shut down. And when you think back on it, it's like, okay, well, I made more than I maybe invested, right? But that time, I'm not going to get it back. Like, during those 6-7 years, I could have been building something else with that team, which, yeah, maybe I would have invested much more in and made less money, but I still would have had it now. So just for the listeners, because I see people coming up to me a lot, asking me to like partner up on stuff like, oh, I'm getting a TikTok marketing agency going. I'm doing this. I'm like, that's all nonsense. Because it's going to, it's a short game,
Yeah, you're playing in somebody else's sandbox, basically.
Yeah. I mean, in 3 years, TikTok's going to be saturated.
But the thing is, it's just such a short game, right? Like, anytime you're dependent on any platform, it's a very short game. It's very unreliable. Like, I'll give you one more example with the Kindle, right? Which, for a while, it was a great platform. When they need you, it's better than when they not need you. And then, so initially, anytime you wrote a book for the Kindle, right, you would get 70% on the sale and $1.50 or $1.20 on a rental. We were making money over fist.
Right.
One day they shut down the rental. Half the business gone, right?
Mm.
Then they changed something else up. Now it's based on pages read. So we had to tweak things to make that happen. And this happens with all these platforms, right? LinkedIn. I've had a few friends do LinkedIn lead generation. It's okay. It's an okay platform,
Yeah.
And I've seen them over the last 3 years go from, well, this is the best thing ever to, man, I need to get out, over and over. So, there's a thing about taking these short paths, like you might be able to build some skills up, but you're not really building a business.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a short path, like you said. I mean, when you see it's the easy route, everybody's doing it. It's the hot thing. Let's make money. But like you said, man, I totally agree. I've been down that road myself in my marketing agency, right? Like, hey, oh, this is hot. Facebook ads, this, and I'm jumping around and I'm making money and everything's going good. Algorithms change or whatever changes. Everybody's doing it now, and then it's like, next thing you know, boom. Everything changes and you're just like, oh man, everything that was working the other day or last month or for the last few years has just been flipped upside down. And how the hell do I fix this? Right? But you got to be adaptable as an entrepreneur. You got to shift and change. I mean, and you have, of all people, Tom, I mean, with that said, man, and what we're talking about, you learn from a young age how to sell and negotiate business by getting haggled by Russian vendors, right? Can you take our listeners back to where your entrepreneurial journey started, and how your actual family situation motivated you to take the entrepreneurial journey or the entrepreneurial path that you're currently on?
Yeah. So the earliest business memories I have is, we used to live in communist Poland when I was growing up until about age of 10. Between 7 and 9 years old, I remember my dad would drive to Germany and Sweden a lot, take me with a few times. And he would smuggle alcohol and things into Germany to sell it, and then smuggle electronics back into Poland to sell that. And I would have two jobs. One, when we're driving into Germany, to sleep in the back seat. And if they try to take me out, and start searching the seats and things, just start screaming and crying and making as much noise so they wouldn't do a proper job.
Right.
And then when we came back with the stuff, my other job was to go to the soccer stadium with my dad and sell the stuff, sell it in my class, sell it in those places. It was different having a kid around. Like, people always think if there's a kid, this person's probably selling something, decent than if you.
Yeah, it's legitimate.
It's more legitimate.
Probably, yeah.
Probably. It's like this internet marketing thing, right? Like, if I remember 10 years ago, there was a big push for having a profile picture with a child and you, right? So you're holding like a little baby and everyone thinks you're.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
credibility somehow.
It's credibility, yeah. But, when I was selling things, I definitely realized what happens if you sell a faulty product, right? Because some of them were, and then I had customer service and fights with my classmates, because you sold me a bad VHR tape. No, I didn't. And then, there's a fight behind the class. Or if I was, walking around the soccer stadium by myself buying things, I realized just how shady people are and how you got to be careful, At that age, like, you didn't understand all of this, right? So I would buy a soccer ball from some Russians, and then I'm trying to pump it up for hours. It's not working. My dad comes in, like, let me see that. Oh, there's no rubber inside. They ripped you off. I would go get a couple comic books, and, I picked one up and said, this looks kind of cool. Put it down. Pick that one up again. How much is it? Double the price now.
Because you showed interest.
Yes, because I showed interest, right? So I learned really quick. Like, my poker face was hard after like a couple of weeks of this. Like, I would then go up to the comic table, and be like, this is all shit. Maybe I'll pick that one.
Yeah, maybe if you lower the price. Yeah.
Yeah, you live and you learn, right?
Yeah.
But the thing I noticed back then, and this is kind of what sparked it, is my dad didn't have a boss. Which was interesting when you heard, like, from classmates, like, oh, my parents are doing this and that. And then this concept of, you buy things for one price and you can sell them higher based on the circumstance, right? Like back then in Poland, the alcohol was super cheap, because it was being made there. But in Germany, with the taxes and everything, one, you couldn't get the same quality. You couldn't get the percentage as high. And then you would pay like, so much for it, like my dad could make money. And then the VCRs were so cheap in Germany, but after all the import taxes into Poland, they were so expensive, no one could buy them. So by smuggling, so you just, the different markets, you could take something from one market and sell it somewhere else. Like that just planted a seed. And I just never got rid of it. Like I've always been dabbling in it, and eventually I realized how to build an actual business, not just take advantage of like arbitrage, but
Right.
But it definitely did start everything from that. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really powerful lesson to learn, from your parents at an early age, if they don't have a boss. I think a lot of us, especially our generation, a lot of our parents, at least in the US, had jobs. Corporate America was still relatively, a big thing. There was still plenty of entrepreneurs and small business owners, but I mean, I didn't know that many people, maybe a couple who had parents who were entrepreneurs, and who only reported to themselves. So I think that's really cool, to learn as a kid. I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm biased because as an entrepreneur now and, as a business owner myself, I think it would be really cool to be a kid and learn those business skills from an early age. I didn't really get into learning too much about business until like college. So
here's the thing about that. Like, I see what you're saying, and I actually wish I've had that too. This is not at all what my beginning was like. Okay. I didn't learn business skills or those skills from my parents.
Okay.
Everything I learned from my dad and my family that wasn't business, I had to unlearn later on. Right? Because it was all smuggling, shady shit. Like, it was good for my drug dealing when I was 16. But once I actually got into business when I was 18, 19, like it really did not help a lot. When we came to the US around 10, like my parents didn't have anything almost. Like they, we came, I think, with maybe $500-600. And they couldn't go into business because it was too risky. It was just too risky for them. So they got jobs. The shittiest jobs you can imagine. Like the ones that people say, oh, those Mexicans are taking our jobs. No, my parents took those jobs. And you know what? You can take them back.
Yeah.
Because they suck. This was like $3-4 per hour, working all shifts. Like I never seen them. I would go to school, get picked up by the bus. Didn't see my parents, come back. Didn't see them, go to sleep. Didn't see them. Mm-hmm. They would only be around on the weekend. Like I was just, always by myself. I was like, this is horrible. And they're broke. We live in the ghetto. Like they're working all this time. We're living in the shittiest apartment. There's gunshots in the hallway. And we have no money. Yeah, there was no upside, right? So that really turned me away from this job world, right? But still, I had a couple, teachers tell me like, oh, the corporate world is amazing if you get in the right spot, blah, blah, blah. So I did peek into it when I did my, sales training kind of hustle, right? By going to these corporations. And it wasn't great, man. Like you were just a number. You were really just a number, like in and out, doesn't matter. You're building someone else's business. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned was actually in those jobs. I worked for insurance for a while, right? And I don't know if you know anything about selling life insurance or things like that, but what happens is you sell a policy, right? Let's say someone's paying $200 per month to MetLife, right? And they will give you 6 to 9 months of that as your payout, and they keep everything else. So then you start thinking, if I just sold, let's say, 20 of these, right? And you will over time. How much money would I be making monthly if they just gave me what I sold, right? This recurring kind of idea. And that's where the SEO business started from. I was like, well, what's the shadiest, easiest industry to get into with recurring income? Because those are always, the ones with no barrier of entry. And there's no barrier of entry to SEO. Right. Someone could wake up tomorrow and be like, I'm an SEO expert. I was like, well, yeah, you're about as smart as half the other guys. You're right.
Right.
It was a horrible business, and we didn't keep doing it for a long time, because there's no control. Man. Like you're always playing with fire. Google can do anything. It's an easy business, but it's just not a great business, not a sustainable business. Like you can't scale it as much as something else. So, but that idea came from that. And a lot of lessons I learned was by actually doing something that my dad was doing, getting burnt really bad and realizing, okay, yeah, that was not good.
Right.
And doing,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I wish I had someone like, some kids are lucky and they usually don't appreciate it. Someone that owns like a $20 million proper company. And I've met these kids later on and their parents. I learned a lot from them. The parents, not the kids. The kids are usually idiots.
Exactly.
But, you see someone like that and it's like, wow, like, this person actually built it from scratch. They have the whole team, they have a product, they have a brand, they have, and you can learn a lot from that. So I really wish I had that. I would have probably knocked down like 10, 15 years and, pushing through hard and messing things up if I was able to just kind of like say shadow my uncle or dad with a real business, for like 3-4 years. So yeah, if anyone has that, man, that's super lucky.
But to go back to what you said, I mean, you're like, you didn't really, all the shady stuff, you had to unlearn, but through all of that, and what I kept hearing was like, you still learn how to hustle through that, right?
The hustle, yeah. So here's a problem with hustling though. Like you don't ever want to be that guy later on that people are just like, oh, he just hustles. That's not actually a good thing to say. It's like when
it depends on the approach, right? Like when I'm saying the hustle, right? The hustle can be negative and it can be positive. I think having that hustle mentality, right? Somebody that continues to push on, and that's what I see as hustle, right? I don't see somebody doing the shady stuff or whatever, hustler can be, have that bad connotation to it. But yeah, you don't want to hustle all the time, but you want to have that hustle to you. And I think being an entrepreneur, you automatically have that, right? Because also being able to shift when things get crazy and you have the entrepreneurial spirit to bounce and, hey, like SEO, that's something that, right, you cannot build a sustainable. I mean, I'm not saying you can't build a sustainable business. People have, but it's not for everybody, right?
Well, it's not sustainable when you do a service. Like you can build one if you're doing an app or a program or just anything else, like a network. If you're like the guy selling the shovels, you can. But doing an actual service, I haven't seen it yet, and I've seen these SEO guys. So what do you mean by hustle? It's pretty much my inability to quit. And that's something you need to have as a business guy. But I've always had that. Like I was always a horrible loser and I couldn't quit. Like even back in the days I got into a fight, you beat me. I was like, you're going to have to kill me because I'm coming back.
Right.
So that's just something that, like my own little problem that I've had. Just I couldn't quit things. Like I would go in all the way with everything that I've done. But there's time for hustle though. Like it really is. I get the hustle kind of porn that's happening in the business world now. Like, oh, you got to do this and scale. I'm like, maybe. In your early 20s, yeah, I think so. I think you should be hustling as hard as you can and build things. But then when you start turning 30, it's time to get other people to hustle because now you know what's working and shouldn't be doing those things anymore. And it's time to start thinking. Because you got to find out
figuring out how to scale it.
Yeah, you got to figure things out. You got to, you got to look, kind of foresee problems before they happen, because problems always happen, right? So you got to become kind of reflected in a lot of ways, and that kind of turned for me at around that age too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so we're talking about starting businesses and hustling, and I've heard you talk about a muse as it relates to business. Can you kind of define what a muse is, and do you think that changes, or do you think we can learn, what's the mentality of building a muse, and how does it differ from what the kind of businesses a lot of people are building?
I've never actually thought that part through. Is
there any characteristic of a muse, or any, or is it just a muse is a business that you start in order to, basically eventually automate and have some, income coming in. That's, you've built the systems, the processes, and you have some revenue coming in, or is it a little bit more than that?
So here's a problem with, like this whole concept. It's hard to give how-to advice, on anything beyond just the simplest concept. So, for example, if I, went back 5 years, to what I've done over those years, and I took all the steps and everything, and looked at my business and how it's working and what motivated me, and I tried to recreate that now, myself, my own steps. It wouldn't happen the same way again, right? Ever. So here's the thing, like with business, like you will rely on a lot of internal motivation, right? And a lot of luck, which people like to kind of say, no, if you just work hard, you're going to have to get lucky along the way multiple times. And luck does come much more to those who are kind of positioning themselves for it, right? So,
Sure.
Being around the right people, doing the right business model, having a good team, taking time to kind of look at your competition. There's different things you can kind of do to help that along. But I know what you're asking for, but I always feel very wary of. It's like when someone says, "Which book should I read on business?" Right, and that tells me right away this person doesn't care about reading the books.
Right. They just want to find the one thing.
Yeah. But beyond like the basic stuff of like, okay, start a company, do an LLC, put out offers, do good customer service, like these basic things.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to give advice, right? Like in the beginning, amateurs always look for tips, tactics, strategies, all these things, right? But when you get a little farther down the line, you're kind of looking at the nuance, right? So if you already know, let's say, for example, if Facebook is working for people at this moment, right? And you don't need to read multiple books on how Facebook worked for them. Like you actually go to the accounts of people who are working well, and you start looking for little things. How can you borrow or steal something and use in your own account? Like a lot of it will come from you, right? Like you should be your own muse in a lot of ways, right? Like I always feel weird looking up to anyone because, like I said, if I even took my own journey and tried to recreate it, I couldn't again.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
So someone else's journey is even more difficult to recreate and impossible. So like when I read biographies or business books, I like some of them, like Shoe Dog, the Nike story, amazing book.
Yeah.
But it's not going to help me be a better business person. It's not going to help you. It might motivate you a little bit. It might make you realize that, the parts I think that are shitty in my business, I haven't seen anything yet because this guy, like
right.
things like
it
that.
gives you some perspective, but a lot of it, and there might be some, there's always, there's facts all over the place from books and podcasts and, all kinds of content out there that can, like you said, motivate you, and and that might be it. That might be enough to kind of get you to the next, get you through something, whatever. But yeah, you're right. I think a lot of information, we just end up being like, that's really interesting, and that's it, and that's kind of as far as it goes.
But that's the problem with motivation too, right? Like if you need to motivate yourself by reading books, like maybe you're not in the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take much more to actually make it. You're going to go through some hard times, and what are you going to do? Oh, I need to grab 15 books now? Like, no, this is the time to, just get shit done.
Yeah. What always kills me when I go on LinkedIn and it's, there's, whenever I do and I actually scroll through the, people's feeds and it's just like one motivational thing after the other. And I'm just like, man, you could spend your whole day just reading stuff to get pumped up, and then and then you get pumped up and you're like, oh man, I don't have any time to do anything else. So
yeah. So what I find with social networks is, and LinkedIn, by the way, like the best thing I found last week, and it made my whole experience better, is how to mass unfollow people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's like a script that I use, and it went from 6,000 to like 50.
That's awesome.
yeah.
And my feed looks amazing. You know, on Facebook, so I got the news eradicator, which I don't see any nonsense. And on Twitter, what I found like 2 months ago, and it changed my whole life, you can mute keywords.
Ah.
Okay.
So I've muted anything with COVID or anything, you know, politics, Biden, Trump, any nonsense which I don't want to listen to, and my feed looks beautiful now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, I feel like I use those to test ideas, right? Like that's what I kind of use social networks for. And then you got to kind of look where your market is too. Like with me, since we look for course creators, you know, we look for people on LinkedIn. We, you know, reach out to them there. We collect their emails. We use those to create Facebook lookalike audiences. We go into the groups on Facebook. We promote directly to them. On Twitter, we're just testing a lot of shit because it's like I think Twitter is like a corner store in New York. You know, and like you got a bunch of, you know, people talking shit outside and like, hey, you know what I think, and then you know what I think.
Yeah.
That's what Twitter is like. So I find that that's like my most loose network where I just let everything go. Like I'll talk a lot of shit on Twitter.
Awesome.
You know, Facebook is more like a reunion, so you don't want to, and LinkedIn kind of like a networking event. So you also want to keep things civil, but Twitter, anything goes.
That's what it's. I'm not big on Twitter, but that's kind of what I've heard. You know, just yeah.
So you know, you got to kind of use these tools how, you know, they fit your personality and then business. But once again, a tool is not going to save your business. A tool is not going to fix anything. Reading a business book is not going to change anything. You might get a good idea from it, and then you're going to take action on it. You're going to see, oh, parts of it work, parts don't. There's a lot of nuance in there. You got to figure out on your own. So I'm actually not huge on, you know, like giving just like this blanket advice, because look, I could find 2 business books on any topic that give completely opposite.
Yeah, true.
Like the Gary Vee with his nonsense about hustle all the time. And then there's like a different book I read, have no employees and just spend all your time thinking, build stuff that's scalable, never do service businesses. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of sounds like nonsense too, right? Like it's always like,
Where's that common ground, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying when you read these books, it's like, well, the only advice I can give, if there's a business book written to sell something, just don't read it, which most of them are these days. Like someone's writing a book because they want you to do something, whether get into a community or buy something else or a product, or, you know, like if it's trying to sell something, just, yeah, that's probably worthless.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're all doing to some certain extent, though.
And that's fine.
I mean,
we still play the game, but
yeah.
I'm giving advice to people like us now. Like everyone else, go read them.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Somebody's got to do it.
How about we fight through the nonsense, and for all the listeners, you go do it, and we'll continue to move forward with advice from Tom. But so brother, since we're talking about that, right, and to kind of take it in a different direction, you know, and to go hand in hand with the muse discussion, there's this idea out there, and, you know, I read books from time to time. I don't sit there to try to say, okay, well, if I action this from this book, then I'm going to take it to the next level. But the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, I don't know if you're familiar with it or read it, but it talks about that most of us have 2 lives, right? The life that we live and the unlived life within us that stands in between the 2, right? And that's something called resistance. I'm pretty sure along your entrepreneurial journey, we all encounter resistance in some form or fashion. So as an entrepreneur, how important is it to identify resistance when trying to lessen the emotional roller coaster of running a business?
This really varies, right, from person to person.
For sure.
You know, like I lost a lot of my abilities to give a shit a long time ago. And that helps, you know, because a lot of resistance comes from wondering how people will judge you, right? And I remember seeing a study where I think this was in a classroom or something, but they divided the classroom into two different groups. And one group was judged based on quality and one based on quantity, right? So this one group would write like one piece of content, and this one would write 50. And what they found is the ones that wrote the 50 had much better stuff and better ideas, more creative. And the ones that wrote the one actually, held back a lot because they wanted to be perfect at one time.
Right.
And I think a lot of the resistance comes from that, right? This perfectionist thing. And I had that when I was doing music in my early 20s. We need to put out the perfect CD, perfect album, perfect song we got to make now. Instead of being like Lil Wayne, who would come out with 600 songs, most of them complete garbage, but then between those, he created enough hits because he just put out so much material. 50 Cent did the same thing. There was a couple of these guys. So much material that a few things hit so well. But they also got better, by putting out so much stuff. I actually think that being a good salesperson too is very much like being a comedian, a stand-up comedian, except instead of a punchline at the end, you're selling something. But you're going to have to put out enough work too. And then when you hear about stand-up comedians, I don't know if you ever looked into them, but I have recently, they will grind from comedy show to comedy show for years.
Sure.
Always grinding. And that's kind of what sales are like. And that's kind of what business is like. If you keep putting out offers, not waiting for the perfect offer, right? And I had a couple of friends who've done that and made huge companies because after the 30th offer, the 31st was the one who actually made the money. If you put enough stuff out, eventually something will hit. And, the resistance only comes in when you're trying to make it perfect. When you think that people actually care about you more than they do. And it's always like that. Like, people don't give a shit. They might listen to you and be like, oh yeah, that was stupid, and then forget and go into something else. In 3 weeks, you could come back and they don't even remember who you were.
Yeah.
So
great point.
I love that book, by the way, the War of Art. I think the concept was great, but once you understand the concept, that's all you need.
Yeah.
And then it's more of just, I got to start putting content out. I got to start putting out offers. I got to start putting out whatever it is your business does. If it's products, you got to, put out more products, I guess. That's all that really is, right? Stop caring what people think, because most of them are not thinking about you at all. And by putting enough stuff out, something eventually will hit. And then it's going to be a whole different ballgame. Well, now how do I make this work and sustainable and scalable? And will there be an exit? There's a lot of other things that will come with that. How do I build a team? But that's the only part I think resistance plays. People just don't put enough offers, don't put themselves out enough. Like, if you look at Scott Adams, I was watching him the other day, and the quality is okay. I think he just does it from his room on an iPad, whatever. But if you look at the number, I think the guy put out like 1,200 videos in the last few years. I mean, this guy already rich, he's got, cartoonists, all this stuff. But even with this, like, he's still hustling. I think he does like a 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. live stream every single day. And that brings you back to those, comedians and, sales guys that you got to put in the work.
Yeah.
You got to grind. And I find people who just do it, and that's what I've always done. I just do it, whether I like it or not, don't encounter resistance as much. It's more of the people who are like, I'm waiting for an inspiration to strike me. I was like, well, if you want to do it, just go do it. The best advice for writing that Stephen King had in his book on writing was just sit down and write.
Yeah, just get started. That's the hardest part of most things, but especially for writing. I think we're all a little intimidated by it for one reason or another. But once you get into it, it's not so bad.
Well, and the cool thing is that in the beginning, nobody knows you. So, like, I know you're trying to write a perfect blog post that everyone's going to read, which is not going to happen in the beginning ever.
No matter how good it is.
No.
Too.
And it's a great thing too, because it probably sucks. Like with my podcast, I'll have people come up and like, oh man, I love your show. What should I listen to? And I'm like, well, if you want to keep liking my show, I would skip the first 75. you know?
Yeah.
And back then I thought they were good. But now I'm like, if you want to continue being on that same, like, yeah, go Tom, like that, just forget about those. Just move, even around 100, just go after 100. You'll be better off.
Yeah. Then you'll start continuing to listen. Yeah. It's all about keeping people interested.
Yeah. But you get better with time, right? Like with your podcast. So you're going to be at a different level in 3 years than you are now. And you're a different level now than you were before.
Absolutely, yeah.
But if you just waited for the perfect episode, I'm not recording anything until I completely rehearse, and you just keep waiting, right?
We're not releasing anything,
and that's what we do. Yeah, Clint and I were just talking. We're kind of planning for the show, and you're talking about different things we could say on the show, different topics, different guests we could have on, and then we were both like, hey, let's just hit record and start talking. Like no better time to start our first episode than right now. And, and at that time, and it was perfect because then we just kept that momentum going and we continue to, hopefully get better and hopefully learn and grow. So I think that's, I think that was critical because we could be still planning and still trying to figure out, hey, how are we going to make it exactly perfect and get everything just right? And, but yeah, I think that's a great point, is just to get into it and start.
So here's some advice on the podcast from what I've seen. In the beginning, I kind of used it as a networking tool, right? And just to, get better at doing it. But it's a long game. Right? Like you're not going to see returns from your podcast for a while. So what I found is that if you get your perfect clients who you haven't sold anything to yet on the podcast, interview them, most of them will become your clients. And that happens very, very quickly, right? So I've done that. I remember like a year and a half ago, I took 4 people who I thought would be perfect clients out of my league, for a couple of reasons, brought them on the podcast. Each one asked me after the show, like, hey, Tom, can we talk about this, work that you do?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you guys want to get a bit of a return quicker from the podcast, I would think about that.
No, that's great. That's great advice, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so Tom, you talk about making business antifragile, which I think is really interesting, especially because of what's going on with COVID right now, and we're finding out how fragile many businesses are. What are the key things that make any business anti-fragile?
So what I've always done when I looked at my business, right, I looked at the different barriers of entry and constraints that I put on it. And by constraints, I mean, am I able to throw in a couple people that don't know what they're doing and train them within a couple days to run the operations for me? Am I able to work from anywhere as long as I have a mic and a laptop? Am I able to step away for a week or two without the business breaking, right? Like at my different business models. Am I able to sell something to a customer more than once? When I bring them on, is this a one-off sale or will they be on for a little longer? Do I have anything to sell more to that customer, right? And you can divide it in different ways. Like for me, the number one thing is being able to work from wherever I feel like it. Because I'm sometimes in Asia, sometimes in the States, sometimes in Europe, depending where I feel like. But what I found recently, especially with the COVID situation happening, right? Because you've seen which businesses did better than others, right? Like my service business, for some reason, I think it was mostly luck because online courses just blew up. I was booked solid but I'm completely non-essential when you think about it. A marketing agency is usually the first thing to go, which I didn't see at all during this time, right? So this is luck. This is not me being smart. But I did notice that the platforms were doing extremely well, and the info products, the courses themselves, were doing extremely well. And the businesses who have been able to have an info product, a service part, and the software part were completely anti-fragile during this time, right? And this is something I've recently noticed. So often you might have to do a lot of things you don't like, and that's usually services in the beginning, so that later on you can do whatever you do like. In my case, that was going from marketing to everyone to niching down, right? Which now I choose my clients. I say no to 80% of the people that come to me. But I'm still realizing that now I need to come up with the info part and the software part to really make this business completely anti-fragile. And then even if I, for months, don't feel like having any clients at all, I can.
Yeah.
But during any situation, one of these will go up, like maybe the software will go up, one of these, right? But I'm in the same niche, because you don't want to switch niches too much. Like you don't want to try like 50 different things, like, oh, I sell golf clubs, and then I'm, helping people build their TikTok accounts. And like, you don't want to be that guy. Mm-hmm. You do want to find your area and kind of stay in it. But yeah, like in my case, it's more about just, in e-learning, okay, what can I do? I can teach people something. I'm not going to teach them how to market courses, because I've seen from my experience, if I even tell my client, go do this, this, and that, it's always wrong. I got to redo it. So it's not ethical for me to say like, okay, here's a course on how to market your course, because you're going to fail. It's got to be something else, right? But
Sure.
Then I'm looking at these platforms like Teachable, Thinkific, all of them, and they're shitty. They're really shitty, And I'm like, really? Their whole job is to host people's courses, and they're down half the time. Their customer service is crappy. Their billing is off half the time. And I'm not saying I'm going to go in that route, but I'm seeing, even these bigger boys in my field, like they're really not that special,
Right.
Some of them received a lot of funding initially. Some of them were the first companies in the space. But if you kind of start seeing through that, you'd be like, well, I could compete on some level.
Right. So you're seeing opportunity there.
Yeah,
on the software side.
But that's by being in the market long enough, right? Like I've been in the e-learning space for enough years where now I'm seeing things. And then the only question is like, am I willing to put in the time and effort?
Right.
But the anti-fragile, that's really it, man. Like you need to make sure that your business model will not break immediately, right? Like this happened with travel agents. Travel agents historically were seasonal. If you really think about it, like back in the days, people go in the wintertime and summertime, and then it's pretty much a dead industry. Then they kind of came up with these ideas where, it's an all year round business. But I mean, the second travel stops, like you're done. Yeah. You're so done.
Or the second, software comes out, like platforms that make it much easier to plan your own vacations, then it, continues to die. So I think that's really interesting what you said about not necessarily jumping niches. You're not necessarily diversifying in different niches, but you're diversifying within your own niche. So you have different product offerings. Like you can charge a lot more money to do the one-on-one service part of your business than you could for an info product. But you could sell theoretically a lot more of the info product, right? So, and you don't have to, you don't have to do anything for that. Well, you have to create it, but then once you've created it and you're marketing it, then it's just, it's pretty much automated. So, and then if you've got that software part of it, like a tool, then people can use that on a monthly subscription type basis. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking about recently. It's not only, because usually when people think about anti-fragile, it's like, okay, I have a service business, I'm just going to offer more services.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a non-essential person and you didn't get lucky like I did, like all your offerings could just go off the table because people are just like, it's not worth it. So
Sure.
I think going in those different directions, it's much safer, much, much safer.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely.
That's interesting.
So, Tom, I mean, through your entrepreneurial journey, man, obviously seeing success as an entrepreneur, publisher, salesman, and one of the top Polish hip hop artists. I mean, you've done a lot of different things, right? The thing I want to ask you though, and the cool thing about all of that you've done and bootstrapping the majority of your entrepreneur ventures without any, like basically zero outside funding, dude, that is awesome. And I want to applaud you for that. But through this journey and through this process, because man, that's mind blowing in itself. What has been the most difficult thing about being an entrepreneur, man? It could be several things. Doesn't have to be one.
Well, yeah. The thing that I'm, thinking of, because it's different at a different stage of your business, like of your journey. Like in the beginning, the roller coaster itself was the most difficult thing. Like in the beginning, right? And I remember my friend who's been in business for much longer. He's like, Tom, like the stuff that you're stressing over now will be business as usual in a year from now. And eventually you'll become jaded enough where you'll just be like, whatever, like something that will crush you in your first year. In like your 15th, you'll just be like, all right, let's go get some dessert or something. Like I'll figure this out later. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't matter.
It's not earth shattering.
Yeah. So that changed a lot. Going back to your older friends, right? Like if you've been in business for 15 years, you start thinking differently, or in 20. And you go back to the friends who just have jobs that you've kind of hung out with years ago when you tried to get a common ground. It's difficult.
Yeah,
it's very difficult. It's hard to kind of talk about the same stuff and be on the same page. We have different glasses on now.
Yeah. Well, it's like going back to your old neighborhood. Like for me, I'm from Florida. It's like leaving North Carolina. I went, to college and all this stuff. I'm doing my own thing, and I go back home to my old neighborhood, and you still see friends that you hung out with doing, whether it's selling drugs, whatever it is. They haven't evolved, right? So they're just stuck.
Change is a good thing sometimes.
Yeah,
it is, and then when I think of it too, structuring your day is an issue sometimes. Like if the business is doing really well, it usually gets really boring because you're just doing a couple things every single day, right? And it's often easy at that point to just kind of be like, all I'm doing is producing one piece of content per day and doing this and that. Maybe I just don't feel like it. The money's always coming in.
Yeah.
And that always leads to a, bad moment later on, like you're just planting these seeds, right? So to keep, this internal motivation thing when things are doing really well, I think that's the most difficult. When things are hard, I feel it's easy to stay motivated. Like if things really break, and I think the last time things broke for me was maybe like 2 years ago with one of the businesses, and I just went hustle mode for 2 months, and I came out of it way better than I was before. But it was just me getting pissed off again, because it's easy when you're against the wall. Like even now, I've been coasting for so long, and I keep pushing. But I mean, it's different type of push, right? When you're just, things are just like, everything's all right. Like you have to, or you look at your bank account, it's like, that's not happening. Okay, that's.
The complacency sets in, right? I mean, I think that's where it's at. The complacency, when everything's going well, that can creep up on you and actually break.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that when I was doing music too. We came up with something that people loved a lot, and then we kind of coasted for a while. Like some of the stuff came out after that. I was like, I don't know if we should have put that out. So it's usually I think that's a big problem for it because it's a long-term game, right? Like it's hard to tell someone like, be like this or that for the next 40 years. Because if you're going to be in business, you're kind of looking at your life in business, right? So if it's from being 20 to 60 or 65, it's really hard to tell someone like, just this problem. Well, it's like, well, no, you're going to have a lot of problems. So it's hard to, see like which place someone's at. But in the beginning, it's also distractions.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you said, you'll go on LinkedIn, the news feed, and you'll read over other things. You might go on the Warrior Forum and see 100 different business ideas within the first 20 minutes of your career.
Yeah.
The distraction will definitely be hard to even choose where I'm going. And once you start going, then it's those paths, right? Like, am I taking the easier path, the harder path? Well, yeah, there's just so much stuff. Lately it's more of me thinking about my team, right? So there are two different ways of running a business, and I've always opted for the McDonald's model, which means I can bring in people, get them trained really quickly, and the business is running, right? Which is great. But I've always wondered, like, what could we accomplish if I had like a team of 5 A players? Like, not people I can bring off the street, like people who are much better than me, running the business with me, right? And I know it would push me a lot more and make things difficult in some ways. And I'm not sure if I would want my business to go in that direction, but I kind of feel like it might have to if I want to build something, huge, at some point. And that's just the decisions we come to, right? Like, it's not really a big problem, but it kind of is. It's like you get these forks in the road. Like, do I want to continue, making good money, having an easy business, or do I really want to step into that role now and see, like, what can we do? Which is risky, always very risky.
Yeah,
Sure.
But I think those are the hardest things about business because no one can give you the answers to these, right? Like, you can read many books, you can get coaching, but remember what I said. If you took your own path and you repeated it, you would still come at a different, outcome. So taking anyone's coaching advice, basically useless.
Right.
Reading anyone's book about what they've done, basically useless too. Like, it's going to come down to you. And those moments, I think, are always the hardest. And that's going to come a lot in your career because it's like, well, the buck stops here. Like, you got to come up with this. You can distract yourself with podcasts and books and all this nonsense, but at the end, you're still going to come back to the same place, have to sit down and be like, well, I'm pulling the trigger on this or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not just going to figure something out after 5 years of being or 10 years of being in business and then be like, all right, for the next 40 years, it's just upward trajectory and we're all good, and it's like, that's just not how, like, you just start doing the math. You're like, all right, revenue for the last couple of years, extrapolate that out for, times 10 or 20 or whatever. And like, that's how the next 10 or 20 years is going to be. But yeah, you just can't, you got to be on your toes for sure. And you got to be comfortable with, and confident with where you are. But like you said, there's going to be different obstacles for you along the way. And there's going to be different obstacles for everybody else as well. And those, they're going to be challenging to each, individual in a different way.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part, right? Like people are afraid of sitting in silence and actually being responsible for their outcomes. That's a scary thing to some people. I'm used to it now, but in the beginning, it was also a bit scary to me. Right? Like, if I do this and my company fails, like, oh, I'm under the bridge. What I realize is, like, nothing happens the way I thought it was going to happen. Even if it fails, something else has been happening because I've been building it, or, by taking action. So my outcomes, good or bad, that I foreseen never happened exactly the way I thought they would. So at this point, I always know, like, oh, I'm imagining this and that, but those will not be the outcomes. regardless.
Right. Yeah. Might be something you didn't anticipate.
And having the faith in yourself that you can always pull out of it, that's the best thing to have. And for that, you need to be able to sell, because that is the only thing that will always be able to pull you out of these problems in business.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That makes sense. Well, I think I know the answer to this next question, but as we wrap up this episode, Tom, what's the one piece of advice or tip that you would give our listeners to add value to their entrepreneurial journey?
The sales part, closing deals, that's the one skill I would focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can make that happen, you're fine. The scariest thing I see, and I see this with a couple of businesses, is when they outsource the most important part of their business. And, I've had people come up to me and be like, oh, let's talk about how we can work together. And like, oh, I got to wait till my key person is in because they're the ones, and I'm like, well, let me just talk to them because it's their business. Like, you don't even need to be around.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then they will think like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you can't run the business without them, can you? No. Yeah. So
it's like they're in charge. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, but they could run the business without you. They're like, oh, no, it's my business. I was like, no, but they're bringing the sales in. They could replace you easily.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, and I've seen businesses do this, and it's a big problem. So your first hire should never be a salesperson. Like, that should be you. And then even if you do eventually hire them, you still need to be able to come back and take that over if anything happened. Like, that ability in a small business, right? We're not talking about like a Pepsi or a Coke company. In like a smaller business, this is a key component.
Yeah, as you're getting started. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of businesses out there that are just starting up, and they want to, they do want to, like you said, they want to outsource everything and think that can include sales, and all right, I'm going to be, completely hands off. And that's a nice goal down the road, right? To have, everything automated. But if you can't step in when you need to, especially from the beginning, to make those sales, that's something you definitely have to be able to do.
Beyond that, like when you do automate things, but you don't know why they're working.
Sure.
And things stop working all the time, right? It's a big problem. So
yeah.
So that's the biggest advice I have. Like ability to close deals, understand why the sales are working, why they're being made, how they're being made. That's what keeps your business running. Without that, there's no business. So it's a hard thing, but you just gotta put in the time for that.
Love it, man.
I agree.
Well, guys, that's a wrap for episode 16 from the both of us, Tom. We want to thank you, brother, for taking the time out of your day, man. And a good way to start your day and a good way to end our day, and joining us and adding value to what we're doing on our podcast, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much for listening to That Entrepreneur Life. To learn more about what Tom is working on, check out smartbrandmarketing.com or the Smart Brand Marketing Podcast. If you like what you heard today, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or any other major podcast directory. You can find us on all the socials and on our website at thatentrepreneurlife.com.
That said, we also want to quickly give a special shout out to our family and friends, to include all of our listeners, our followers, and subscribers. If you find value in our show, please consider making a donation. Even just a few dollars helps us keep things moving along and brings value to your entrepreneurial journey. Thanks for continuing to support what we do as entrepreneurs. And don't forget, guys, to join us next week for another episode of That Entrepreneur Life.
Thanks for listening to That Entrepreneur Life podcast. Be sure to visit thatentrepreneurlife.com to join the conversation, access our show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode as we continue to add value. Until next time.